So we're going to now transition towards our speaker. And before, I'm going to bring up Ronnie DeBrouwen from our, who's in, co-chairs our Adult Education Committee and helped to come up with the ideas for Jews of All Hues. As she comes up, I'll just say this is really happenstance, beshert, as we say, that allowed for this to happen. It happened that Marla Brettschneider, this wonderful professor from New Hampshire, just happened to be in Rochester right around the time we were going to start our new season. So it really worked out, and she was game to come here. So Ronnie's going to officially introduce her.
Shabbat Shalom. First thing I want to do is thank all of you for supporting this Jews of All Hues program. Evie and I have had such joy, and with our committee, in helping it continue. It started out as such a germ of an idea, and we've watched it through its gestation, and I guess we helped midwife it along with the rabbi and the cantor, for thanks to whom we're able to do this. And of course, you all know that it's especially thanks to Michael Berger that we're able to bring you aspects of Judaism throughout the world every single month of the season that we do it. We're also grateful to Todd Sugarman for supporting this, and Joanne for doing so much work always to help this happen. You'll find out about the foods that Zach Rosenblum has created for us from Africa. Marla, thanks for making the trip. It is so lovely to get to know you. And Evie, I just want to thank you again, because being a co-chair with you is a joy. So Marla Brettschneider is a professor where she has chaired both of her departments. Politia? Well, okay, only part of it came out. Political science and international relations and feminist studies. She has published numerous academic articles, more than 15 books, some of which I think she brought tonight, and 5 special editions of academic journals. Brettschneider is an award-winning scholar in the field of Jewish diversity, politics, and political theory, bringing together feminist, queer, class-based, critical race, and decolonial theoretic analyses in Jewish context. Her most recent book, published this year, is Juicy: The Jewish Queer Lesbian Feminisms for the 21st Century. Her major single author work will go out this coming January. Revolutionary Legacies: Jewish Feminist Political Thinking, with Jamaica Kincaid, Golda Meir, Hannah Arendt, Frida Kahlo, Gertrude Stein, and Emma Goldman. And she has 2 edited books on, and they're on their way out. We have them here?
We have the first one, 2 books on October 7th.
Oh, thank you. Her single author work, The Jewish Phenomenon in Sub-Saharan Africa, The Politics of Contradictory Discourses, remains the primary text to introduce the kind of the communities that she's going to present tonight from the Global South in the context of a theoretical analysis of the complex and multi-layered global power dynamics at work. Brettschneider is the general editor of the Mellon Press Africana Jewish Studies collection, and she has published 6 books in this field. She also has 2 young adult kids. She's just moved to Portsmouth, and a kernel of info about her. Anybody who would like to invite her south during the winter, she loathes snow and cold. So welcome her to your snowbird place. Come on. Thank you.
So feel free to interrupt me if I forget. Look at you all. Oh my gosh, so exciting. Okay.
Marla, just make sure to talk into the mic.
I will try that out. Let's see if that works. Am I getting there? Yes. Okay, I also have to do this and stand on my head and various other things, so we'll see if I can keep at the mic. Thank you so much, all of you. It is really such a treat to be here. I love visiting communities and getting to share and meeting with congregants, and I get to be here in your sanctuary. I don't always get to come on a Shabbat or on a holiday, so I get to be in your shul and in your sanctuary. And thank you to Rabbi Alex and Joanne and the committee and so many individuals and all of you who make the whole place possible and make events like tonight happen. So thank you very much. So we had a different title, I think, for tonight, which I like a lot better, but I'll just sort of move on. And just replaying to understand where my work in Jewish communities in Africa is situated in my larger body of work, because it's a small field, but we all really come from very different places. So as you just heard, so I do Jewish diversity, politics, and political theory. I'm formally trained as a political theorist, and that includes Jewish critical race theory and decolonial theory, etc. And so Juicy is my newest book, and it's so much fun. About every 10 or so years, there's some new Jewish queer book, and this is the new Jewish queer book, so I'm very happy to introduce it. And I'm so looking forward to Revolutionary Legacies coming out. I actually got to be in Buffalo just about 2 years ago at SUNY in your Jewish Thought department, where they had me giving a talk from the Emma Goldman chapter. So I get to be in Buffalo again pretty soon. Okay, so this was my first foray. I didn't intend to go into this field. I was just doing general Western critical theories in Jewish context. And some other time I can tell you, by accident, I kind of fell into this, and I ended up writing this book, which Ronnie introduced you. And then I ended up staying in the field. And I realized that one of the main things I was going to be doing if I wanted to stay in Africa, all of the scholars and all the people writing and speaking in this field were mostly global northerners, mostly white-skinned, some Jews, not all Jews, but everyone was always talking about them. And so, publishing isn't really like you see in the movies where, you're on the phone all the time with your editor and you're like, no, I said fuchsia, or like whatever. But I do have a tiny bit of a perch by being in the US and having access to US publishers and publishing in English. And I decided that was one of the places I really wanted to commit myself. And so increasingly over time, I did various edited projects experimenting with different ways to bring forward voices from the communities, and we might talk a bit about some of those, and lots of articles. These are 2 new books that are coming out. They were supposed to be out in June, text issues, but there'll be 2 new Jewish Africa books coming out in that collection, and these are the 2 October 7th books that are extraordinary, and I'm happy to talk to you later about these October 7th books. Okay, so I only have so much time. It's a huge continent. It's a huge subject. So I'm going to do some general introductions, talk about some trends, and a little bit of some specifics. So of course, we know Jews are a global people. We've lived historically and today around the globe, and where it can be found among many ethnicities around the world. Sorry that. In the US, you might know, if you're studying Jews around the world, which is fantastic, I don't know if you're also studying Jewish diversity, racial and ethnic diversity in the United States, and there are millions of non-white or non-Ashkenazi Jews, people of color, Jews of color, here in the United States as well. And that's actually my background, sort of the US Jewish multiracial context. I have this, which I decided not to even update, because anytime you look at any information about world Jewish populations, you will never find any information on the kinds of communities I'm going to be talking to you about tonight. You will just not. And it goes farther than Africa to some other regions. And I've done work in other regions, but as a scholar, I decided that I wanted to sort of stay mostly focused and get really deep in Africa. And so I do some other regions around the globe in the global south, but mostly Africa. So to get a little bit of a sense, take a breath. When demographers talk about global Jewry, people often talk about that there are approximately 15 million Jews worldwide. And there are actually also probably about another 15 million Jews involved in the kinds of communities that we'll be sharing about tonight. And that is the scope of the phenomenon that we're talking about. So we're going over into Africa. And there's a lot of reasons why we may say we know about some communities, the Jewish communities in this part of the world, or that we don't know about others. But there's a lot of particular reasons, because it shouldn't be that surprising that we don't really know a lot about Jewish life in Africa, because look where ancient and modern Israel is. It's right there. And I'm no geographer, but I know about politics. And the politics of continents and geography is a really big thing. And there are a lot of political reasons and reasons about Christianity and modernity about why the continents are the way they are. But there's no, someone will give me a better word. There's no like geographical reason that Israel is in the continent we now call Asia. And so a lot of times in these communities, people will not believe they're Jewish. They've never heard of Jews in these places. And they're like, well, how did your communities come to be in Africa? And it's actually a nonsensical question to these millions of people. Because for a lot of people on this continent, Israel, or ancient Israel, modern or ancient, is just Northeast Africa. So you need to start to reorient yourself to understand where we're headed tonight. So some people know, we know a lot about Ashkenazis. We always need to know more about ourselves. I'm Ashkenazi, yippee. But we do know a little bit about migration patterns across northern Africa. Oops, sorry, I'm not great on tech. We know, of course, about migration patterns more into the Middle East, of course, north through Turkey and into Europe, where a lot of us are from. Okay, we know about those, and Jews traveled far and wide, and it's been centuries, right? But what we mostly don't know, there's a dividing line of northern Africa, what gets called northern Africa, and the Sahara Desert, and then sub-Sahara, south of the Sahara. And it's just a different world, almost in the continents, the history of continents. I'm sorry, I'm not used to this little thing. They were almost actually considered different continents historically, like it wasn't even one Africa. So if we're back in Africa, we do know a little bit about migrations at this point. We didn't always know, but some people know about some Jews who have historically been in Ethiopia, and about bringing some airlifted to Israel in the 1980s and since, and some other things, and we can talk about that. But if you think about it, and you think about all the other routes that we know that went so far, it actually shouldn't surprise us so much that migration patterns also went further south in Africa, like they went lots of other places. Or over to Madagascar. And Madagascar is a fascinating country. Everyone in Madagascar says they're an Israelite. The Prince of Madagascar is an Israelite, and he supports the local Jewish communities, and we'll talk about how that works another time. But it should not be that surprising. And also all the way, new migration patterns, not only west in northern Africa, but sub-Saharan. And so what we find all over are these things that a lot of us don't get taught, and even get taught to imagine or question. Okay, so we know, as I'm sharing, that there are millions of people in this part of the continent. It's a large continent in the Jewish phenomenon in sub-Saharan Africa today. There are many unique circumstances and some interesting trends. And it's a very rapidly shifting dynamic. Some people who've been studying, and might be you, because I don't know all the great things that you've already done in your programming, know about some of the other communities around sub-Saharan Africa, and we could talk about them. And it's important to know that until very recently, most of these communities that I'm telling you are all over the place, and so many people involved, actually didn't even know about the others. And they didn't have any idea that they were part of a continental trend. So here are some overall things. Many, but not all, of the people in these kinds of communities consider that their origins are Israelite, like from ancient Israel. There's a lot of talk in sub-Saharan Africa about the lost tribes of Israel. In these contexts, it comes now through a Jewish context. Historically, that was really brought to this period because, to this period now in geography, because of the Christian obsession with the lost tribes. And I don't know if you know, the British think they're a lost tribe and the French think they're a lost tribe, and they're like constantly out there looking. Concept also of the lost tribes, and something new is happening with this concept of being a lost tribe. Now, amongst those, again, who consider, again, not all, consider their origins Israelite, some now identify with other groups, like these are my origins, and now I'm a Christian or a Muslim or something else. Some now consider themselves Jewish only, and some, which is a little hard for Americans, we could talk about it later, some consider themselves Jewish and even, which is hard for Americans, Christian or Muslim or other things. So there's multiple things within the overarching trends. Now, again, amongst those, this particular group that I'm talking about, who trace their origins back to ancient Israel, some want relations with global Jewry, and they would be delighted to come here anytime. Some want recognition from global Jewry of their groups as legitimately Jewish. And some kind of don't care, not in a mean way, but some aren't really like asking that question, and they're not really concerned about what people from the global north have to say about them, because they're living their lives and making their communities just like us as dynamically as possible. Okay, so I know that you know already about certain kinds of Jewish ethnicities, Ashkenazis, Mizrahi, Sephardi. Do I need to?
Maybe we have a mixed group here. So.
That's right. So Ashkenazi are kind of from Northern Europe, not Southern. Eastern Europe, that was the Balkans, that was under Ottoman rule for a long time. So Ashkenazis have been around for about 1,000 years. I am assuming many people in our community here tonight have Ashkenazi backgrounds. Sephardi were those who are exiled from the Spanish Inquisition, and Mizrahi and there's a lot of dynamics between Sephardi and Mizrahi, because Mizrahi were communities that technically in Hebrew means eastern, but it's actually not east of Israel, so it's a modern invention. And there were a lot of ancient communities, Iraq, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and then the Portuguese and the Sephardis came and also joined them. So there's a mix in the same community sometimes of Mizrahi and Sephardi. Okay, things that people don't realize when you're talking about Sephardi is that wherever in the fleeing the Spanish Inquisition was also the time of Spanish and Portuguese, especially Portuguese, domination navally, and they were running around the world on these boats, and there were lots of hidden Jews, and so Jews ended up all wherever the Portuguese went to colonize. They were in hiding, but they have a long history. So you can think of a place, maybe you never thought of history of Jews in a place like the Philippines. Is it Asia? Is it Spanish? It's a little bit of both, Latin America, right? Because it was colonized by the Spanish, and Jews ended up there as part of the Sephardi diaspora, and lots of other places. So I just also want to remind you that sometimes there are these ancient communities, China and other places, and then they were also joined, not only from North Africa, but in other places around the globe, maybe Indonesia, India, Pakistan, Kurdistan. A lot of those communities are represented. There are people speaking from those communities in the October 7th books, which is just really, really exciting. Lot from sub-Saharan Africa, US, Israel, et cetera, but also Indonesia, Pakistan, et cetera. So now also to make sure we have some terms, because this has gotten a little tricky in the United States in the last couple of years. A lot of us call ourselves Jews, and I don't know a ton about that, but my understanding is that we say we're from the tribe of Judah. So of the ancient tribes, we're from this one tribe. But even in our history, we have called ourselves other names that might be somewhat familiar and might be somewhat controversial now, such as Israelites, Hebrews, term Mosaic after Moses, or B'nai Israel, children of Israel. Okay, and okay, so many of the communities that I'm talking about have been developed about in the last 100 years with the self-consciousness, the way that they're developing now, and especially in the past 40. And there are specific reasons for that. It's about the internet, and it's about the Arab boycott of Israel and the Cold War, which I love talking about, but I'm not going to do right now. Not all folks necessarily identify as having Israelite origins. They are becoming Jewish or Israelite or Hebrew out of their experience today, and But what also happens is that a lot of times when communities or individuals move into this path of exploring and studying Judaism, they also decide that they have found, actually, their ancient Israelite roots. So there are lots of ways of the origin stories work around the country. So some people, again, know about the B'nai Israel. I don't know if you know, for example, that Professor Ephraim Isaacs, if anybody's heard of him, he's actually the founder, he's Ethiopian Jewish, the founder and first professor of Afro-American Studies at Harvard. Ethiopian Jew. And then he went on and is founder and director of the Institute of Semitic Studies at Princeton. He has a piece in one of my books. He let me work with him in the 1980s. This is actually the first piece in English that Professor Isaacs wrote on Jewish issues about Jewish Ethiopians. And it's not usually found in searches because it was sort of pre-digital. So it's very exciting. And we have a really wonderful history. Again, that some people know. A little bit of the story of the Ethiopians, but I have a whole book on a different story that many of you might not know about, because there are actually probably at least a couple of 100,000 of Jews still in Ethiopia, living dynamically and battling, having all the wonderfulness of Jewishness and all the terribleness of Jewishness, because they're living in violently anti-Jewish areas, and it's horrendous. So these are some places that I often find some people know about. And just kind of off the top of my head, this isn't meant to be exclusive, but this is actually a list that I put together. So if you look from, you might not even know communities in all these countries, and then we're actually talking about Africa that looks more like this. We're talking about countries that go on in every region of this part of the continent. Not everybody likes to do it. I like to also study these groups in their local context. Some people are just like off on their spiritual quest Jewishly, and I'm totally into that. That's great. But also, as a political scientist, I also really care about the dynamics in which they're living concretely and materially. And so, as I'm sure you know, but let me just remind you, the conditions that most of them are living in are extremely difficult. Inequality is tremendous. Inequality within Africa, between Africa and the rest of the globe, on any number of matrices that you can imagine: gross national product, longevity, homicide rates, literacy, all sorts of things. And again, I'm just going to go through this to just introduce you, remind you of their concrete circumstances, which are very difficult. You have incredible homophobia in Africa. Many of you might not know. More and more countries are passing laws that not only is it illegal to be gay, actually you get the death penalty. Actually, you get the death penalty if you know someone who's gay and you didn't turn them in. There's tremendous gender gap. There's issues about contraception, rape, different rape laws, rape in marriage. Like, it's all different. And so they all face different concrete material conditions. A thing that I really like to make sure people know about is this thing that was really surprising to me, so I'm going to share it specifically with you, is that I'm not a historian, this wasn't my field, but whenever I knew anything about Christian missionizing, I just sort of imagined like hundreds of years of colonialization and Christian, like, you know, whatever. I had some weird image in my mind of hundreds of years ago. But actually, Christian missionizing is most intensely crossed with the period post the 1950s and 60s of independence. And as these African countries were gaining their independence, European Christian missionizing, and particularly evangelical Protestant missionizing, really soared. So there's some degree of an increase in Islam on the continent, and you can see the downward slope, which is a little lighter, is the plunging of what people call indigenous African religions. And the major thing that goes up is, since the 1950s and the 60s, the period of the rise of Christian missionizing. And so many of us might not realize that, what a recent phenomenon that is. Okay, so again, some people know about these. You might know about some of the DNA testing of the Lemba in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and some other countries. There actually right now is a huge shakeup in the DNA thing, and there's new evidence about the DNA thing, and we can talk about it later. It's happening literally right now. There are meetings in Zimbabwe, like right this week. Now, I have not been to all of these countries. It's extremely difficult to travel in these parts of Africa, very difficult for a Western woman. So I've been to many and spent time with many local communities. I'm not an anthropologist. I didn't like spend years living in some village. That's not how I did it. But I'm a political theorist. But so I've been with many communities, but I also get over these years, 15, 20 years in the field, spent a lot of time with folks from these communities, also outside of Africa. But this phenomenon just keeps growing and blossoming. This is a more recent phenomenon. Nigeria has tons of synagogues. Oh, thank you. I have this here. Thank you. And I don't. How am I doing on time? About 5 minutes?
No, why don't you take, you can take another, 10 minutes. It's very interesting, right? Let's hear some more.
Thank you. It really knocks my socks off still. Okay, so there's tons of synagogues in Nigeria. There's all these questions about, some of you know about some significant ethnic differences and tribal differences in Nigeria, that they're landed with European help into major massacres and genocides, and the Igbo, and there's discussions about the ancient Jewish origin of the Igbo. And so, but this is just as an example. There's lots of things flourishing. So this is the Jewish Women's Forum in Nigeria, and that's a recent photograph, just to share with you. In a place like Côte d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, there have been so many different Jewish organizations in the last about 30 years, morphing, changing, just like a lot of our little organizations. A lot of them started from a Kabbalah center. So you've probably heard of some of this, like Madonna. Maybe I'm a little old to say this, but like the red thing, the red yarn on the wrist, right? So the Kabbalah Center was a US development that went worldwide, and it said it had Kabbalah to introduce into the world, but it was not Jewish. And so the people, I'll come back to this in a minute, the folks, all their stuff was in Hebrew. All their stuff was in Hebrew. They developed their own prayer books. People around the world are praying with their own prayer books in Hebrew. They are not prayer books that you would recognize. They're through the Kabbalah Center. But a lot of folks who start that way then decide, then want to know more about Jewishness and move into Jewish life. So there's been a lot of them. So this is one of the older Kabbalah centers, and now it's in a different place because things move around a lot. Some of the communities, this is about mikveh. So it's very hard. I don't even know in Buffalo if you have a local Judaica shop, but it's not like you can go downtown and go to the local Judaica shop and get whatever, right? And so lots of things require a lot of attention and work and invention. And so this actually is Abidjan, which is the main industrial capital, not the political capital in Côte d'Ivoire, is by the sea. And this is a pool that's fed with seawater, and it's halachically, Jewishly, religiously legal for mikveh, a water ritual. That's very ancient. But a lot of folks in these communities then will go to natural bodies of water, and the men do it, but you can also imagine it's so much easier in general, as hard as it is for most of the men. It's so much easier for the men to have time and flexibility for travel, and so it's really a challenge in communities for women to be able to fulfill the mitzvah of doing mikveh. They have to go and find these and get organized and get a bus, and it's a big deal. Some of this is another community in Eitz Chaim in Abidjan. They're also in a new place by now. You can see, though, they have a mechitza, a separation between the genders, and a lot of Africa is very traditionally and gender segregated. So this community connected in Israel with some ancient Mizrahi sages, and so they have a lot from the Mizrahi tradition, and you could see some of that in various ways. There are bima, there's sort of stage areas in the center. Just comes up in a lot of ways. This is on the cover of my first book. These kinds of fabrics is very common in Africa. And as you see, it's a little embarrassing, but the hand-woven fabrics that's traditionally of this tribe, many people see in it a resemblance to a talit, a Jewish prayer shawl. And so there's a tribe in Côte d'Ivoire called the Dan today. Their name is Dan. They're out in the countryside. There's millions of folks there. They're mostly Christians, some Muslims, mostly Christians, but they understand themselves as part of the lost tribe. They are the tribe of Dan, and they still use the name Dan as their name. And they have all sorts of reasons, linguistic, historical, culinary, all sorts of reasons that they show an overlap of ancient Israel, and they, explain themselves as connected. And just, and so that's on the cover of the first book, this beautiful handwoven material. Okay, in places like Cameroon, there's at least 3 or 4 communities there now. When I was there were 2. Remember, there's also some differences with colonized. There's a lot of not everything's English or French, but there's a lot of Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa. It's kind of interesting. A lot of times there's questions about who becomes the leader and what kinds of honorific titles. And sometimes folks learn the term rabbi, but often there's kind of like a young whippersnapper who's like been able to get into the cities and get to internet cafes and bring back the knowledge and becomes a kind of charismatic leader and starts a new congregation and moves into Jewishness. And then there's usually an older elder. And so there's always these questions about who everybody is and what their names are. So we talk a lot of them. Sometimes we call the elders more Reb. We have to try and explain. It's a very honorific title, even if they didn't hear it before rabbi. They all know Moses. Moses was a teacher, etc. So there's just a lot of little things that go on. There's someone we were talking about musical traditions. A lot of these communities, you might have heard of some of the communities with musical traditions, and some of their CDs are available, like the Abu Udaya from Uganda, magnificent. But a lot of these communities, again, they were developing separately from each other. And many of them have, over these years, written their own liturgy, their own music, and everyone in this community, then from the women, the children, everything puts us all to shame in the United States. They know every single word of every single prayer that was created in their communities. And so Cameroon is one of the most dynamic musically places. The ways the synagogues are developed, sometimes it's just a room. They don't have a lot of resources. Sometimes what this is a synagogue in Douala, Cameroon. What that big thing is that at a certain period, the Kabbalah Center was sending out, if you've ever known, the Zohar is the major text of the Kabbalah tradition, and it's many, many volumes, and the Kabbalah things around the world. And so they don't have any other Judaica. So sometimes we would be in places where there would just be a kind of concrete space, a folding table, and the Zohar. Sometimes they left it in the plastic that they got it from because it was such an honor to have it, and it was so holy they weren't sure that they could touch it, right? So there's just so much that goes on. The communities in Gabon, also very interesting. Another one with the more red, this is one of their leaders. This another tremendously beautiful musically. This is the Chazan, the cantor of one of the communities in Gabon. He also has developed all this liturgy and all this musical tradition. And again, all the women, all the men, but every single woman and every single child knows every single word to the entire liturgy that's created out of these communities. I showed this because I just love this tradition. In Judaism, many people know we have various kinds of ritual, hand washing. One of the things that was common, a ritual with your hands, and so it's usually just like some kind of plastic tea kettle, and it just became something I really grew to love, and it was interesting because it was shared so widely. I just, again, wanted to show you this in Francophone. Gabon is Francophone, Africa. This one actually has a freestanding building, which is magnificent, but again, the conditions are really relatively challenged. They, like all of us, though, will still try to beautify their places of worship. It's a mitzvah. It's a wonderful way to be Jewish, is to beautify our places of worship. Also, to let you know, social media exists there, but it's not like it is here. And so radio remains a primary communication method across Africa. And so many communities have, over time or once in a while, they have radio programs. And so they get to talk to people in their entire countries as Jews. Now, a lot of us don't even know they exist, or people will say that they're not even Jewish, but they're usually considered Jewish in where they live. And again, with all the beauty and all the awfulness that can come with being Jewish. And so, for example, something that happened radio recently in the last year or so was a really strong woman from one of these communities did this incredible program on her national radio on intimate partner violence, rape and marriage, sexual assault. and did it from a Jewish perspective. Now, this is a topic that is really taboo in a lot of these communities. And so she spoke to a nation of people and a nation of women and did it in a Jewish context. And so she got to bring this outrageously important topic into a public sphere and in a Jewish context. So the kinds of stuff that goes on there is just constantly mind-blowing. This is just another one, again, just to show you some of the poverty. This is one of the older leaders that we were asked to come and bless his compound. And it's really a compound, but the compound has just some concrete blocks, and you wouldn't necessarily recognize it from the United States as a compound, but this is a very wealthy, honored elder, and he has a whole compound, and we drove out into the country to visit them and whatever. Another thing, again, like I said, you might not know of them, but they're known as their local Jews. Many of them have registered with their national governments as a community, and so they're known by their local and national governments as Jews. And so many of them have these certificates. That's why I have it there. Anyway, there's so much to share. There's so much that has changed. There are trends, and there's also so much diversity. And a major thing that's been happening in the last few years, like I said, when they started, even though we're talking about millions of people across a huge continent, that they had no idea that basically anyone else was doing almost exactly kind of the same thing that they were doing. By now, this was spearheaded by an organizer from the British Commonwealth Jewish Community and a US organization. It's called SAJA. There is now a Sub-Saharan African Jewish Alliance in which they meet and they lead themselves and they create materials and millions of WhatsApp groups and other kinds of publicity. And there's so much that's interesting and dynamic, and then there's, like I'm in Jewish community, there's so much that's a little scary and problematic. So Jews make communities, Jews make organizations, and we have different but similar problems all around the globe. Thank you.
Sorry. Why don't we, because it's very interesting, if it's okay, Marla, afterwards, maybe after services, we'll have people come in if they have questions and we can have a larger discussion. This was, it blew my mind. I don't know. Raise your hand if you learned something new this time. Yeah. I'll tell you, as Marla is going back to her seat, a funny story in Israel. My cousin, who's the same age as me and lives in Beersheba. And he loves the different nationalities that are in Beersheba, and has gotten to know the Ethiopian community. He speaks a little Amharic, and we were down there many years ago, and a friend of mine said he wanted to go see an Ethiopian synagogue. So we went down to the synagogue, and my cousin is a Kohen, is a priest. And so when he came in, someone at the synagogue asked, and they gave him traditionally the first aliyah, the first blessing before the Torah. So he's preparing. He doesn't know, sometimes you're asked in that role to actually read from the Torah. So he knows the Torah backwards and forwards, but he prepares a little bit and doesn't know what's going to happen. Right before he's about to come up, there is a fight that breaks out. Apparently the elders of this Ethiopian community were not very happy that the Israeli Kohen was going to be usurping their role. And luckily things calmed down, but they didn't speak Amharic, which is the more national language of Ethiopia, and they spoke Tigarit, which is the more localized one. So it was very interesting. It was all happening. My friend and I, we had no idea what was happening, but it was like fisticuffs were literally about to break out. So please, we're so grateful that Professor Brettschneider has been able to come here and teach us, and it really fit right in. It's beshared. So we'll have a chance to really process that afterwards, and we have some wonderful food. So let's move toward